Today on The Better Part, we're going to be talking about the state of parenting. We're going to talk about families, fatherhood, and parents.
Because of the nature of human beings, the world is changed one heart at a time. Right now, there are approaching 7 billion hearts on this planet with us. And you could think one heart at a time, how are we ever going to get anything done? Well, the truest, deepest things have to happen one heart at a time.
Welcome to The Better Part, a program that encompasses a diverse spectrum of topics important to our community, which we hope will both inform and entertain you. We invite you to sit back and enjoy the program. Today we have back with us our guest, Tim J. Myers. And I am so glad to have you with us, Tim. This is so much fun to have you return to us, and this time to talk with us about fatherhood and about parenting and families. And I have to say, I love your book.
Thank you.
Absolutely love this book. I read it and I laughed and I cried and I dog-eared a bunch of pages.
Excellent.
And this is such a great book. It's called Glad to Be Dad, A Call to Fatherhood. And you're great.
I agree.
I want you to tell us all why you wrote this book.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Susan. I can't say how much I appreciate that response. Especially, I can think from a writer's point of view, when I read things I love, I dog-ear the pages. So that's music to my ears. It's interesting because people often ask writers, it's a common question to us, why did you write, or where do you get your ideas? And one of the things I often say is, well, you need to pay attention to the world. I think that's something we all could do more. I didn't need to pay attention to this because I was living this. My wife and I are extremely deeply dedicated to each other and to family, to our own individual children, our own family, and to the idea of family. I mean, all the central role that family plays in human life and the incredible fruitfulness that it can bring into our lives. And that in itself would be enough reason to write a book, but the family in America, and many other places too, is not in a settled, stable situation overall, in my view. There have been huge changes in our society, primarily the movement of women into work, into the working world, and that has made things very different in the home. And a lot of people are living a life, and I can't remember, I use this line in the book, but I can't remember who it's from. A lot of families are living a life of what this writer called routine panic. Mm-hmm. And when I say routine panic to people, a lot of people go, oh, that's my life. That's the phrase that describes it perfectly. So the question is why? And this book was about how the modern American family is shaping up, and particularly about the role that men can play in it. I think men need to play a much stronger role. So that it was something that I was living myself, that my wife and I were living every day, talking about, dealing with, and I could also see these changes and challenges on a huge basis across the entire country. That's why.
Yeah, and one thing that I loved about the book is that it's definitely from the perspective of a dad.
Yes.
And it's from the perspective of a dad who has an intimate relationship day to day with the family and with raising the children, because you were a stay-at-home dad.
Right.
You lived this so moment to moment, 24/7, 365 for many years, raising both sons and a daughter, which I have two sons in their late 20s, 30s now, and I saw so many incidences that you relate in the book. They're real. They're
you
so
have to be
real.
there to know that, don't you?
And and it's a crack up. I mean, it's like when you're in the midst of it, is it that
Right.
funny? No, but looking back, or even looking back the next day, it's like, oh gosh,
Yeah.
this really happened.
Exactly.
And it's precious. I mean, it's just to me, these are precious observations, and you do it in a way that is through a guy's eyes. I mean, this is not, and you're a jock. I
Right.
mean, you're not a namby-pamby mama's boy
That's right.
guy. So,
And I appreciate that point too. I think one of the things that's happened since this huge change in our culture, which, by the way, before the feminist movement became a mass movement in America, because we've had a feminist movement for centuries in the United States, but before the 70s, it wasn't a mass movement. And when it became a mass movement, one of the biggest changes was obviously women coming to work. Well, the traditional family situation in society was, I have to say, well organized. And I grew up in that kind of family. My mom stayed home, that was her realm. My dad worked, that was his realm. And things were organized. Now, I'm not speaking up for that. I am incredibly delighted and continue to be decades after the fact that the feminist movement happened in America and changed. It was a long overdue change. But it did throw our social organization off kilter.
mm-hmm.
So this intimate life between, a connection between a father and children is a relatively new thing, even though, of course, it's not true that all fathers before, the 70s were bad fathers or didn't care about their kids. It's not that at all. But there is a tendency, and it's still out there sometimes, to marginalize fathers. I talk about in the book, one of the most chilling moments I ever encountered in my work on this book was, my research for it was, and I give a lot of examples of places where fathers are left out of a parenting context,
Mm-hmm.
where parenting is equated with motherhood. In one position, there was an article about families who had lost sons and daughters, mostly sons, I believe, but in Afghanistan or Iraq, soldiers who'd fought for the United States and had died. And in the writing about the grief of these families, they mentioned the mothers and they didn't mention fathers.
Mm.
Now, this to me was astonishing. And I thought partly that's because fathers have been absent or only partially committed to domestic life. A dad like my dad, who worked super hard for us, unbelievably hard, still was not home. He was an absent father. But on the other hand, what we envision is what we tend to end up with in society. So this intimate day-to-day moment, and I love the fact that you use the term moment-to-moment, that moment-to-moment life with all that it has to offer, part of the reason this book exists is because the benefits were so wonderful to me as well as to my family.
Mm-hmm.
I'm giving a long answer to a short question, but that's where that day-to-day thing came, and I really appreciate the fact that as a parent you would understand the reality of it, because that's also another theme. The reality is often different from what people expect when they go into parenthood.
And I think too that the reality is that when you're blessed with the ability to have two parents, and not every family does.
Exactly.
So it's especially hard for single parent families because they have to play both roles, which is really, really difficult. And I have to give so much credit to single parent families that manage. I mean, that's hard. But when you have a dual parenting family, I found it really enlightening for me. I mean, I learned that there's a point where, as a woman, I need to just sort of chill. Dads do things differently, and dads, in some ways, do things better. And it's not that much, really, is it that important to get all the goop out of the burners? That I thought was a great example, because I do.
Yes.
When I do the dishes and I do the kitchen, I freak out if the burners aren't wiped out. But really, in the scheme of family life and parenting and what's really important to the family, is that important? No.
This is a really interesting topic too, because this comes up again and again in all kinds of writing from different people about these issues. And I want to throw in, by the way, to go backtrack just for a second, not only is it this incredible pressure on a single family, a single parent, but I define family in a really broad way too. I mean, there are so many varieties of family now in the United States, and I salute all of them. So adoptive parents, gay parents, grandparents who are raising kids, and then you can't even begin actually to come up with all the wrinkles on the pattern.
That's right.
And I think that's a beautiful part of modern American diversity. But this whole question of how you run the household, One of the things I found, and my wife and I found really quickly, as you know, and again, I always say the single most important thing in a marriage is talking to each other. Was that we ran up against these gender roles. And of course, I was a product of a very strong modeling of the traditional gender role. She was the same in her family. We wanted to do things differently, as young people often do. Most of what we wanted, it turned out we were right about, but also we were young. We had to figure things out as we went along. But those gender roles, you don't just turn those off, right? It's not like a spigot,
No.
like I'm a member of the 60s generation, I'm not going to be like my parents. You bring forward a tremendous amount of unconscious learned behavior. So for my wife and me, it's like in a marriage, there are often these conversations that span decades. One of the themes of our decades-long conversation has been tight versus loose. So I'm loose and she's tight, just like you're talking about. And one of the things we learned as I became a domestically committed father, and by the way, I don't believe that every man has to stay at home to be a domestically committed father. There are too many varieties of people's lifestyles and all kinds of things. But any man can be a domestically committed father. When I became a domestically committed father and working with my wife as parents and as marriage partners, those gender role things got in the way a lot. And we carried those things forward. And a simple thing is, I was too loose and she was too tight. And we both have moved toward the middle. And one of the things about this that I think is so beautiful is that it actually improves marriages in a huge way. The domestically committed male is going to have a much better marriage. His wife is going to be grateful. She's, by the way, the gratitude of women for men being domestically committed shouldn't be overplayed too, because she's already doing it, right? So it's not like I'm the wonderful guy. I get some feedback sometime where I want to say, yeah, it's great that I'm doing this, but look, my wife's been doing this all along, so let's not, don't lose our heads over how awesome I am as a man, whatever. But it makes that marriage stronger, and we both get closer to the middle. Yes. And in fact, I just saw some research this morning from a relatively new Pew study that showed that concerns, it's still a complicated picture. Husbands still do not do as much childcare or as much housework as wives do by a significant measure. But there is a coming together, a convergence of stress over work-life issues in both men and women in these two-family marriages, or two-person marriages. That doesn't make sense. dual parenting, thank you. And so you can see that the values are starting to shift so that men are considering that something that is their responsibility, and that is a big issue for me. You don't have the right, in my opinion, as a man to say, you take care of that, I'll take care of this. The world just doesn't work that way anymore. And of course, some families, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having the traditional housewife, working husband thing, or vice versa, because we also have that with the working woman and the house husband. This coming together, though, this coming to the middle, to me, is a beautiful, beautiful part of this.
Oh, yeah. And I've been married for 41 years.
Wow, congratulations.
And raised 2 sons with a domestically committed dad. So what I see from reading the book, from hearing you speak, as well as from my own experience, is that marriage is about teaming.
Yes.
Life is about teaming. And my children have learned from having the experience of the teaming how to be team players.
Absolutely right.
And some stuff, you have on teams of various sorts, you have tight people and you have loose people. And that's good because we all can fill each other's gaps. And it's when we get hung up on trying to make the other team players be us, laying our values on them, that things get mucked up.
Absolutely right.
And you speak a lot in the book about values. And this is a book about family values. And it comes through so strong and clear that it's not judgmental at all. It's accepting of what's happening with your children. Your daughter reacts differently than your sons.
Exactly.
My sons do things differently than I would do them. But the values are there. The values of family and love and caring for each other, empathy, You know, just some really beautiful things that really go to team play.
In fact, I love the way that you're bringing this theme out, and you're making me think of it more specifically than I had before too, about how this coming together. And I obviously I'd thought about that. I mean, there's a lot in the book about coming together. That's what relationships are, right? Relationships are unity from diversity, whether between two spouses or all the members of a family. Um, and this, I also appreciate very much your saying that family values, but adding that it's not judgmental. We do have some people who are willing to use family values as a cudgel to beat other people with, to
That's
say,
right.
you need to follow my values, whatever. This is not the approach that I take, even though I think there are some, it's not like it's utterly relative. For example, love, commitment, responsibility, those are universal, I think. But I also think there's another separation here that gets in the way of this, which is the idea, a polarization of conservative and liberal. And my wife and I have long agreed that if you're going to be successful in a marriage and successful as parents, you're going to be applying some principles that would be labeled conservative, and you're going to be applying some principles that would be labeled liberal. So, for example, a conservative principle is that you're very, very responsible. Well, it's not like liberals are irresponsible, but that would be labeled that way, but that's absolutely critical for a family.
Yes.
A liberal idea might be that you let children express their individual selves, like you said. And that we also feel, it's a big mix, again, that brings everything together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because you make me think the humor of family life is just also another huge inspiration to me. This whole point about letting children and letting your spouse, letting the others in your family be who they are, and then living with them, right? Finding ways to work together. My sons and I used to play with their Matchbox trucks and
Mm-hmm.
cars. I mean, these little things. We had a big bowl and we'd pour them out. So when Cassie, my daughter, this is some years later, my sons are in middle school by this time or older, um, I hadn't played with them, with those toys with her before. She and I played all the time in all kinds of different ways. So I said, wow, Cassie, we haven't played with these. Let's do it. So I did what the boys and I always did, which is take the little tub, dump them out on the living room floor, and we would play. There was a big junkyard, and the cars all start crashing into each other. So I'm this typical guy-style
Yeah.
approach, right? And I look over, my daughter has picked up a little metal helicopter and a little metal boat, and it's saying, well, hello, little boat, are you sad? Yes, I'm sad, I don't have a friend. Well, I'll be your friend. She's doing relationship play. And I remember I told my wife later, I said, I don't know how to play Matchbox toys with her. I just don't know. So a lot of those, your emphasis on this diversity and how good that is great. A lot of the humor comes from that.
Yes.
And if it's in this context of love and acceptance, then those differences often are smoothed over just by the humor.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean my wife and I haven't had our battles about tight versus loose, but I can see over the years we actually have moved much closer to each other's position. And now I'll say, oh my gosh, she trained me. I know how to do things now that I never would have known if I hadn't been married to her. And I can see that paying off in my own life. And of course, the same thing with my kids. There are different approaches to life too.
Yeah, absolutely. And to actually get to experience that difference, that's
Right.
priceless. That's just priceless. And the humor in the book is great. I mean, your stories just are hilarious. The stories
Thank
about
you.
how Cassie Shilly Shally
Yes, Shilly Shally, as I call her in the book.
dresses,
Oh,
and it's and going shoe shopping, and I tell you, there are so many areas in the book that I said, oh, I have to post this on Facebook, this is priceless, but then it was like chapter long, and I thought, I can't do that. But excellent book. I really appreciate you writing this book, sharing this
thank you.
book, and in fact, I have ordered a half a dozen, and
Wonderful.
I want them autographed to
Of course.
special people who are going to be receiving them, both guys and women, families, and those who hopefully will have families in the future, because I believe this is really important stuff. So is
I
there
appreciate
anything
that,
else that
Susan.
you'd like to mention while we're here? We're going to be having a live studio audience, which is special, and you'll be able to talk with them and hear their questions and kind of have a conversation with them, which is really fun.
Absolutely.
But anything before we wrap up?
Well, I think the main point here is that you can go into this issue, this national issue that's coming up in so many of our lives. How do we deal with work, family? Many people are in their lives, it's a crisis, or at least it's a huge problem. And you can look at it in a purely practical term, in purely practical terms, which I do. We have this group of people who are not filling this gap. In other words, men need to do more domestically because that's where the problem is occurring. But it would have been a very different book if I had just said, look, this is your duty. Men, you have to be domestically committed. My point is the enrichment of life for a woman or a man, for any parent, when you are domestically committed, when you see your life as being bound up in the lives of your family members, when you see that commitment as something that comes from your heart, not just from your duty, when you see the idea in one of the chapters in the book is called the domestic warrior, when you see that one of our deepest abilities to wage peace in a world that is far too racked by violence is what we are in our families, these benefits to you will more than compensate for the incredible amount of hard work and frustration that it causes to be a domestically committed parent. It's not easy, and it's not easy for very action-oriented people. And that was something I had to struggle with, but it's more than worth it in the long run. And in the end, the world, and this is one of those statements I hesitate to make because I'm careful about generalizations, but what happens in families in the aggregate is the future of the world, future of the world, not just the United States. What one person can do as a family member, the repercussions of this are amazing, both positive and in terms of a future that we all would like to have.
I absolutely agree with you. I think that what we do with our own intimate relationships with each other, our community, are reflected in the world, in the planet, and making a difference. That's where it starts.
That's where it starts.
It starts here, and then it explodes out. So thank you so much for writing the book, for sharing with us today. I know the audience is going to have some great questions for you, and this has just been a delight. So thank you so much.
Thank you too, Susan. So we're going to go straight to questions.
We are now reaping the benefits of seeing our grandchildren being raised by loving fathers, along with their wives, loving mothers and fathers. And my daughter and son-in-law have this phrase, the primary parent, that calls to, who's on duty now?
Who's on duty now, right?
And so we think the change is already beginning. How can we encourage it?
Oh, that's a great question. First of all, I have to say too, just that what I believe in all the time is stepping back and looking at just the basics here. My wife and I talk constantly about the ripple effect. Because of the nature of human beings, the world is changed one heart at a time. Right now, there are approaching 7 billion hearts on this planet with us. And you could think one heart at a time, how are we ever going to get anything done? Well, the truest, deepest things have to happen one heart at a time. So the ripple effect, I mean, I love hearing from you that you can see this cascade in your family. And of course, the satisfaction that you have as parents thinking about your children and their children, God only knows where it stops too. And in fact, it may not stop at all.
Tim, when I listen to you talk about your personal life as a father and cite some examples from your book, which I love.
Thank you.
Clearly, you're celebrating fatherhood. I get that you're also celebrating in your own way manhood and masculinity.
Yes.
And that's a very moving and important place for any man who is a father or not a father to hopefully attain in his lifetime.
Yes.
In my counseling work with men, before we can get to the celebratory places, I get from a lot of men where they feel inadequate, defective, etc. Shame has to get worked through. And there's a lot of, as you know, societal and cultural influences that hold men apart from one another to be able to talk with other men, other fathers. I love that you talked about the need for that good conversation between domestic partners and parents that ongoing talk. That's great. But can you share any of your thoughts on what else fathers, expectant fathers or older fathers, need to bring into their life for support?
I think that's a fantastic question. And by the way, thank you too for including domestic partners, because this is clearly not about one sexual orientation, one this, one that. This is a huge issue across the board. Alan, I can't emphasize enough how much I appreciate this question, because this is, as a contemporary male, I had to go through this process, and I was very lucky because I didn't have some of the tough pressures and wounds that many men carry. And it's interesting too, again, polarization and antagonism is sometimes necessary in human affairs. That's a sad fact. There's a time when people have to fight, but any time we can, if we try to meet each other, to collaborate, as Susan has emphasized, we're in a better situation. One of the sad parts about the rise of feminism is that it often put men and women into adversarial positions with each other. We all have to make individual judgments about our individual political, social efforts at change when it is time to confront and fight. And I would never say that's never applicable. But one of the things that happens now is there is a tendency for some people to vilify men, particularly if those men are traditional. A traditional man is often a traditional man because he was raised in a traditional world. Not all traditional values are bad or negative. I mentioned this before. There are conservative values, like the value of responsibility, that I think is incredibly important. Again, not that liberals are irresponsible. So I think the first step, and Alan is a person who's beautifully embodying this in his own life and career, the first step is for men to talk to other men about this. This was not something that was talked about between my father and me, for example. In fact, I was shocked at certain points. At one point in my life, my father told me, I think I must have been 26, 27, had 2 kids. My father said, I need to talk to you. And my first thought was, oh my God, I'm in trouble. My father comes over and he says to me, and I still remember the shock I felt and the relief, because I'm still a kid and he's my dad, right? He said, I've been having some trouble with the younger kids. Can you give me some advice? I was just astonished. This was the first time my dad and I had ever, the fact that we were talking about parenting was an incredible breakthrough. So I think what's really important, and again, your life embodies this, Alan, which I so appreciate. Men who have gone through this need to talk to men who are about to go through this. Men need to talk about these issues in a big way, just like women have traditionally done. I mean, women are of all stripes and persuasions too, but wow, I'm a dad. What does that mean? It's a normal thing to talk about fatherhood. That's a change, and that can only help. And I think that is well underway. I think it's common. I would imagine that in most places it's common for even traditional conservative fathers to talk about fatherhood more than they did before. Maybe not as much as I would like, but I think that's happening.
Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. And I want to just again thank you all. Not only am I grateful, as I said at the beginning, for the fact that you came and the prominent work that you all do, but holy cow, I didn't know this was going to be fun. I mean, thank you very much for that. It's been fascinating.